All right, so you ready to dive into some of this White House drama? We've got this Axios report, right?
Yeah.
And it's about this potential power struggle. And it's happening right at the press secretary's podium. Let me tell you, this thing's got all the makings of a political thriller.
Yeah, it offers a really fascinating look at how communication strategies, especially in an environment as high pressure as the White House, can be just as much about internal dynamics as about the message itself.
It really is like a whole other world behind those press conferences, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
So for anyone who hasn't been, totally glued to every White House briefing, the two central figures in this whole thing are Karine Jean-Pierre and John Kirby.
Jean-Pierre, now she's the current White House press secretary, right? She's the administration's primary spokesperson.
So she's the voice of the Biden administration.
Yeah, and traditionally that role, it comes with a lot of control over who gets to speak and when.
For sure.
And then on the other side, we've got John Kirby, and he was brought in specifically because of his extensive foreign policy background, his expertise. He's the spokesperson for the National Security Council.
Right.
And you might remember he was a pretty constant presence at the podium there alongside Jean-Pierre, especially right after that whole Israel-Hamas conflict broke out in October of last year, 2023.
Yeah, he was front and center. And I mean, it seemed like such a smart move at the time, right?
Yeah.
To have this seasoned expert like Kirby right there to address what was such a complex international crisis.
Absolutely.
But if we're to believe this Axios report, that dual spokesperson approach, well, it started creating some pretty serious friction behind the scenes.
Yeah, and if you think about the history of White House communications, this kind of tension, it isn't entirely new. Sharing a platform, especially one as visible as the White House press room, it can be tricky. There's a natural tendency, I think, to want to control the narrative, to be seen as that authoritative voice.
Sure, makes sense.
And in Jean-Pierre's case, the sources are saying that she felt Kirby's frequent appearances, it was like they were undermining her own authority.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and there's even that mention in there of her feeling like she needed a chaperone. I mean, that's a pretty loaded term, don't you think?
Oh, it is. It definitely suggests a certain level of discomfort there. Maybe even some resentment, right?
Yeah.
And it really speaks to the power dynamics that are at play here. I mean, this wasn't just about, sharing information, right? This was about who had the power to shape how the administration's message was being presented. On the world stage, no less.
It's true.
It's a big deal.
So we've got this potential clash of egos, maybe a little insecurity about roles, and it's all happening in the pressure cooker that is the White House.
And it's important to remember this wasn't just one-sided.
Right.
The report also suggests that Kirby himself felt stifled by this arrangement.
Really?
Yeah, like he was being held back in some way.
Huh. Interesting.
Like he questioned whether this whole dual spokesperson setup was really sustainable in the long run.
So you've got both of them feeling kind of boxed in a way.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it makes you wonder about the administration's role in all of this, right? Like, did President Biden intend for this kind of power struggle to play out? I mean, was this by design?
Well, Axios does mention that Biden initially seemed to favor this two-pronged approach, having them both up there.
Right.
But then there's this other factor that comes into play.
Yeah.
The departure of Anita Dunn.
Oh, yeah.
She was a senior communications aide, really a key figure in all of this.
And that's where I feel like things get even more interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's after she leaves, after Dunn leaves, that's when Jean-Pierre starts, asserting more control, right? At least that's how it looks, according to the report.
That's right. Yeah, precisely.
Like there was this void to fill, and she sort of saw her opportunity.
Yeah, almost like she's, defining her own turf, so to speak.
Wow. Yeah, talk about a power vacuum. But, okay, hold on a second. Like, if this friction was really as bad as some of these sources are saying, wouldn't the White House be, wouldn't they be doing more to try to shut these rumors down?
Well, and that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
The official stance is, a firm denial.
Ouch.
There's no tension whatsoever, they claim. Jean-Pierre and Kirby, they've got a respectful relationship, that's the quote.
Okay.
And Kirby's reduced presence at the podium, well, that's simply due to, other priorities. There's a lot going on, right?
All right.
Hurricane response efforts, those major labor strikes we were talking about earlier.
All the domestic stuff.
Exactly. All things that really need a spokesperson's attention.
So it's like, who do we believe here?
It's a good question.
Because on the one hand, you've got these unnamed sources whispering about all this behind-the-scenes drama.
Right.
And then on the other hand, you've got the White House, presenting this united front, claiming it's business as usual.
It's a classic case of he said, she said,
Yeah, for sure.
with this whole added layer of White House politics, you know?
Oh, cool.
And I think it's a really good reminder that, information, especially in these circles, it's rarely neutral.
Yeah.
There's always some kind of agenda, a spin.
Yeah, there's always something else going on.
Always something else going on.
Okay, so how do we even begin to parse that? I mean, are there signs like tells that could give us a clue as to what's really going on here?
Well, one thing we can do, right, is to pay attention to how this, potential tension, how it might be impacting the administration's messaging.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. Like, for example, are we seeing any inconsistencies coming out of the White House? Any mixed messages, especially when it comes to foreign policy?
Oh, that's a really good point. Because if these two aren't on the same page, you can bet it's going to show in how they communicate, right?
Absolutely. And it goes beyond just, the words themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, think about the optics.
What do you mean?
The way they interact, Jean-Pierre and Kirby, even in subtle ways when they're at the podium together.
Yeah?
Body language, it speaks volumes,
Oh, for sure. It's like we need to become expert decoders of like White House nonverbal communication or something.
Right.
But seriously, the idea of mixed messaging, I mean, that's not just some abstract concern, is it?
No, not at all.
This can have some real world consequences.
Exactly. We live in a world with 247 news cycles, global interconnectedness, right?
Right.
Even what might seem like a minor discrepancy, it can be amplified and interpreted in ways that undermine an administration's credibility.
Wow.
And that has a ripple effect on everything. Diplomatic relations, public trust, everything.
It's true. This is where it really hits home, right?
Yeah.
Like, this isn't just some juicy gossip about who's up and who's down in the White House.
Right.
This is about how effectively our government, how effectively the administration can actually lead on the world stage.
Absolutely.
How we're perceived by allies and by adversaries.
All of it, yeah.
It's a big deal. And, I can't help but think about that little detail from the report where it said that Jean-Pierre wanted to have control over which reporters questioned Kirby.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I mean, that's not just about stage management, right?
No, it's about controlling the narrative.
Exactly.
And when you start limiting access, especially in a democracy, that raises red flags.
Oh, absolutely. It can give this impression that something's being hidden, even if it's not.
Exactly. And that kind of erosion of trust, once that takes hold, it's hard to get it back.
Right.
And it can really undermine even the most carefully crafted communication strategy.
It could all fall apart.
Absolutely.
So, okay, we've established that clear, consistent communication from the White House
Yeah.
is, it's crucial, especially when it comes to foreign policy stuff. So, does that mean that this dual spokesperson model is inherently flawed? Like, is it always going to devolve into this kind of power struggle?
I don't know if it's about the model itself being flawed, I think it's more about the execution, about the personalities that are involved.
Right.
It can work.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But it requires, a very specific set of ingredients. Clear roles and responsibilities, you've got to have that. Mutual respect, a shared vision for what the communication strategy is.
It's like any partnership in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
That's got to be a give and take.
And perhaps most importantly, I think, a willingness to put your ego aside
Yeah.
for the sake of, presenting that united front.
Right, because at the end of the day, it's not about Jean-Pierre or John Kirby. It's about, the Biden administration.
Exactly.
It's about their ability to communicate their policies effectively, their values, what they see as America's role in the world.
Precisely. And that little detail you mentioned earlier about controlling which reporters get to ask questions, that really gets at that tension,
It does, doesn't it?
It's like, who gets to frame the story? Who gets to decide what questions are even asked?
And who's in control of that narrative?
Exactly.
Wow, this whole situation, it really gives you a whole new perspective, doesn't it?
It does.
We often focus so much on the message, what's being said,
Right.
but there's so much happening behind the scenes.
Oh, so much.
All these power dynamics, personal ambitions, people maneuvering for their careers, for their own agendas. It's really kind of fascinating if you think about it.
It reminds us that even in the world of politics, which can seem so buttoned up, human dynamics are always a factor.
Right.
Egos, ambitions, it's all there.
And they all have an impact on how information gets out there, how it's controlled, how it's disseminated.
Right. It makes you wonder, in this day and age, instant information, constant scrutiny.
Yeah, it's relentless.
Can any administration truly control its own narrative?
Good question.
Or are they always going to be at the mercy of these internal power struggles? the different voices competing.
It's something that's been going on for decades, right?
Oh, absolutely.
This need to balance, individual ambition versus the overarching goals of an administration.
It's that classic tension.
Trying to control the message while also seeming transparent.
It's a delicate dance.
It really is.
And it's only gotten more complicated, right?
Oh, tell me about it.
In the age of social media, where every word gets analyzed.
Yeah, scrutinized, amplified 1,000 times over.
Exactly.
It's a whole different world.
It is.
But you know what? That's a whole other deep dive for another day, don't you think?
Another day, another deep dive.
It really makes you appreciate the tightrope walk. Like what these White House communicators have to deal with every day.
It's incredible, isn't it? They have to be so careful.
It's not enough to just have a message anymore. You have to be able to get that message out there effectively and consistently. And to an audience that is so diverse, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And on a global stage with everyone watching.
Right, with the media and the public all breathing down your neck.
All the time.
And you've also got to factor in the different perspectives, the different styles of communication, right?
Absolutely.
You look at Jean-Pierre and Kirby, they're coming from different backgrounds.
Right.
They have totally different areas of expertise.
Sure.
It's bound to create some friction.
Well, that's just it, isn't it? That's the million-dollar question. Can you take those different perspectives, those different voices, and turn them into a communication strategy that actually works? Or do those differences always lead to, mixed messages? And then ultimately, it undermines everything.
It's almost like this, like a microcosm of what we deal with as a society, right?
Absolutely.
Like, can we find that common ground? Can we bridge those divides? Even when you've got, these big personalities and such different opinions in the mix.
It's a tough one, for sure.
It really is.
But you're right. This whole thing with Jean-Pierre and Kirby, it's a fascinating case study.
It really is.
It just highlights how important it is to have these clear communication strategies from the jump, to define those roles early on, make sure everyone understands the bigger picture.
Right, because when it comes to, representing the United States on the world stage,
right,
it's about more than just the message. It's about that internal cohesion.
Exactly. Internal cohesion can be just as important as the message itself.
Makes you think about the importance of leadership, right? And I'm not talking about at the presidential level. At every level.
It's true, every level.
Creating an environment where everyone feels like their voice is being heard.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you've got to have that clear vision, that united front.
And the ability to manage those dynamics effectively. Right. To juggle those competing voices. That's what makes for good leadership, no matter what you're doing.
It's a real art.
It is.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into, the world of White House power struggles and communication strategies.
Right.
It really leaves us with a lot to think about.
A lot to unpack, yeah.
This whole balance of power, how important clear communication is, and then just that constant struggle of managing different personalities, different points of view. It's complicated.
It really is. It reminds us that even in those positions at the very top, the human element, it always comes into play.
It always does.
All those complexities, all those contradictions, and understanding those things, the dynamics, that's how we make sense of the messages that are being thrown at us.
That's how we make sense of the decisions that are being made.
The world around us.
Exactly. So I think the next time we see that White House podium,
right,
let's all just remember that there's a lot more going on than we see on the surface.
Oh, absolutely. There's a whole story unfolding behind the scenes.
It's a stage, right?
It is.
And that's where power, personality, communication, it all kind of collides. And the stakes are incredibly high.
High stakes indeed.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today, but thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.